Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Scale Modeling with Mike Ashey. Today, I want to talk to you about decals, and specifically how I prepare decals to apply them to the surface of a model so that they look like they're painted on that model. So let's talk about decals for just a minute. How are they made? Well, you have a paper backing, you have the clear carrier film, and then you have the inks which go on the paper and the designs which make the decals. Now, with respect to paint, you've got basically two types of paints that cause problems with decals: flat paints and matte paints. And the way modelers get around that is they put a gloss coat over that flat paint. But what really is flat paint? Well, all paints have a glossy appearance to them. And what manufacturers do to create a flat paint or a matte paint is they apply a very, very fine micro powder to it, so that when you apply it to the surface of the model, it has a rough surface. The paint itself has a rough surface to it. And when light hits it, it reflects off in all different directions. And your eye interprets that as a flat color, which is also a slightly lighter than the actual color will appear to be. And let's take, as an example, olive drab. You spray that on, if you were to spray that on a surface, and then take tape and cover half of it, and then take the other half of that surface and just give it a clear gloss, what you would see is that olive drab color would be slightly darker on the clear gloss overcoat. Why? Because your eye is interpreting the light which is reflecting off of that clear gloss, which reflects off at the same angle, as slightly darker color and gloss. And it's this clear gloss finish that modelers use to slide those decals onto that surface in order to prevent what's called silvering. Well, what's silvering? Well, if you were to apply that decal onto flat paint, what happens is micro air bubbles get trapped in the small crevices of the surface of the paint. And when the decal slides over it and then dries, that the clear backing on that decal appears opaque or a slightly silver color. So the way to get around that is to, of course, give a flat or matte paint a coat of clear gloss. But even if you do that, you still sometimes, and I've experienced this myself, have problems with small areas where there is a clear carrier film and it silvers. So how do you get around that? Well, what I do is I cut out as much of the clear carrier film as possible around a decal to minimize the probability of there being any silvering at all. And in just a few minutes, we're going to turn the camera off. I'm going to turn around, I'm going to cut out some decals and show you exactly what I'm talking about. And then we're going to show you some of the surfaces of the models where I've applied decals, and it looks like that decal is painted right on the surface. One other tip here is use quality decals. I like to use the microscale decals because their designers minimize the clear backing around each decal. And so when you're cutting out that decal, you don't have to remove much of the clear backing. And if you look really, really close, they do a really good job of removing as much of that clear carrier film as possible. The second thing that I use for applying decals is I use the microscale two-part system. The blue, the liquid in the blue bottle goes on first, and then you apply the decal right over that, and then after it dries, you use the red bottle. And what this red bottle does is it softens up that decal and pulls it down around all the small details on the surface of the model, like panel lines, whether they're raised or engraved, and rivets, whether they're indented or raised. And it really helps make that decal look like it's painted on that model. So with that, we're going to shut the camera off, turn around and set it back up again, and go ahead and cut out some details. Stay tuned.
These are the hand tools that you will need to cut out your decals. Always use a sharp blade to ensure that your decal edges are clean and crisp. The stainless steel ruler is actually a sewing ruler. Never tear the area being cut from a decal, and never use scissors to cut out decals because the cut edges can separate the clear film from the clear plastic backing, ruining it. Always cut decals on a solid surface. I use either a piece of plexiglass or a glass plate. The advantage of using plexiglass is that the blades last longer, but there's cuts in the plexiglass, so you're going to have to replace it every few models. Advantage of the glass is that the surface will not be affected. However, you're going to use more blades. The W on the left is how most modelers would usually cut out this 1/48 scale letter. On the right is how I cut out that 1/48 scale W. All of the clear film has been removed, so there's no chance of silvering whatsoever. The 1/48 scale decal on the right has a lot of clear film that has the potential to silver even in tiny areas. This is how modelers would cut it out and apply it. Decal on the left has all of its clear film removed. The miss had a clear film connection to the bigger decal. The larger decal will be applied first, and when it dries, the miss will be appropriately positioned. These 1/32 scale letters were connected together with a lot of clear film between them. Be sure each decal will slide easily off its backing when you apply them. To apply the letters A and H, slide the paper either up or down off the decal as you apply it to the surface. To apply the letter V, slide the paper backing down off the decal as you apply it. For the U.S. insignia, cut the clear film from the straight areas first, then either freehand cut the curve or use tangential cuts around the curve to remove the clear film. Almost all the clear film on these 1/48 scale decals for a B-26 Marauder were removed. While it takes time and patience to do this, the results are well worth the effort. All these decals will look like they've been painted on the model. Sometimes the clear film into center areas of small circle decals will silver. To prevent this, remove as much of the clear film as possible with a punch tool. In this case, I'm using my handy Waldron punch tool. The decal on the right will cover a landing gear light, so here again I use my handy Waldron punch tool to remove a small area so that the decal would no longer cover the light. These 1 to 3/50 scale aircraft carrier deck decals will look like they're painted onto the flight deck, now that all the clear film has been removed. The red star on this rudder looks like it's been painted onto the surface. And here is a good example of how the human eye sees colors. A flat color area is lighter, and the clear gloss overcoat makes the color darker. This 1/32 scale kit had a red stripe decal for the fuselage. However, I airbrushed the red stripe on instead. The 2 and the 1 were cut out from the MB and applied separately, and then the dashes were applied. All the other decals had as much of their clear film removed as possible, and they all look like they have been painted on the surface. On the same 1/32 scale kit, there were 2 decals for each side of the rudder stripes of red, white, and blue. The stripes were carefully masked and airbrushed, and the SBD was cut out from the multicolored decal sheet and applied separately. This decal has received its second coat of decal softener. Notice how shiny it is. Once it dries, it'll get a few more coats. After 5 coats of decal setting solution, the decal has pulled down into every recessed rivet and the engraved panel lines, and it looks like it's painted on the surface. Here's an example of a decal placement over another decal. And this is why it's important to remove as much of that clear film so that there will be no chance of silvering. The 1 to 3/50th scale curved wide outlines for the center deck elevator were positioned and added first. The kit also had decals for the deck stripes. However, I carefully masked and airbrushed them on. Then, once those were all dried, I added the straight sections to the outlines. The tiny areas at the connection points between the curved and straight lines were touched up with flat paint and a sharpened tip of a round toothpick. The flight deck 1 was applied onto the deck first and carefully positioned. The 3 was then applied using the edge of the 1 to ensure that it was straight and level. The national insignia on this 1/32nd scale model was applied first. The A was then applied, then the V, and finally the H, and the insignia was used to help position each letter to ensure that they were straight and in line with each other. Note how the 81 and the W look like they're painted onto the surface of the model. The number sequence 117853 was cut between the 7 and the 8 to remove the excess carrier film. The 117 was applied first, and then the 853. Cindy's great-looking body was applied first to aid in the positioning of the word Cindy, and then the eye decal. All the decals on this surface look like they were painted. The national insignia was slightly faded using pencil pastel dust applied with a wedge-shaped makeup sponge. Each row of the mission bomb identifiers were cut out so that the clear film between the rows was removed. The top row was applied first to help position the middle and bottom rows, which were applied next. The stars and stripes insignia on this Hellcat were cut out to remove all the clear film and applied separately. Now they look like they're painted onto the surface. The 86 on this old Revell 1/32nd scale Corsair were cut out from each other and the clear film removed from the inside areas of the 8 and the 6. Here again, another example of how these decals look like they're painted on the surface. All the clear film on the letters on the fuselage booms on this P-38 were cut out, and they again look like they were painted on the surface of the model. Patience and very, very slow cutting will give you great results every time. The decal on this model was very long, and it would have been impossible to apply to the raised and lowered surfaces. The decal was cut into 4 sections and applied to the surface starting from the left and working to the right. Careful positioning, both horizontally and vertically, makes all the difference in the world. So be careful how you cut out your decals and go slow.
Hi everybody, we hope you enjoyed today's tutorial on the secrets of decal application that I use. Give it a try. Cut out all that clear carrier film that you can and apply it to the surface. You'll see a world of difference. And as I said, you just have to be very, very careful how you apply those decals. So check us out at www.mikeashey.com and our YouTube channel at Scale Modeling with Mike Ashey. Have a great day.